Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Stranger ball python. The Stranger is actually a brand new morph on the market. It's not very popular and you may not have even heard of it. As a matter of fact, if you go over to Morphmarket, there's only ever been 5 Stranger ball pythons over on Morphmarket. And it's kind of interesting, I actually hatched out kind of a dinker project. I was actually breeding my coral glow to a normal and I popped out this weird kind of a snake, and as a matter of fact, it almost looks exactly like a Stranger, which is kind of interesting. Although I've seen a lot of snakes over on Morphmarket that have a similar appearance, maybe even 4 or 5 different morphs that look similar. And really the way to really prove out a dinker project would be to breed it to something else. And there's a lot of new stuff on the market. And as a matter of fact, if you go over to Morphmarket and look at all the list of all the genes over there, there's a lot of stuff you probably haven't heard of. And if you actually start digging into some of those genes, a lot of them aren't really that impressive when you're mixing them with other genes. I think they kind of, you know, they think they have something new. Maybe it is new, and maybe it actually has just a really subtle effect when you mix it with other genes. And sometimes you can have a new gene and nobody buys into it. But when it comes to the Stranger, let me tell you, when you start mixing it with these other genes, it's probably one of the most impressive new morphs on the market that I've ever seen. So I want to jump over to the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Stranger ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on morphmarket.com, and this is what a Stranger looks like. And if you take a kind of a closer look at the Stranger, it looks almost the same color as a normal ball python, but you can definitely see some differences. One of the big differences is it has this line that is almost kind of jagged right down the top of the snake, and on the sides it almost seems like the pattern's a little bit more jumbled up than your normal classic wild type ball python. And the funny thing is I actually hatched out my dinker, which almost looks exactly like this, and there's another snake that looks like this, which is the Rio, which is a super arroyo, and I actually pulled that out. Take a look at this. This is almost exactly what my dinker project looks like. And when I first hatched it out, I thought, yeah, that is what I have, a Rio, and then I actually saw a mahogany that looks almost exactly like this, and now I'm seeing the Stranger. So it's kind of interesting. It's really hard to pick out the morphs in a lot of cases until you actually breed it into some other combinations. And I actually have one more picture of a Stranger, and if you take a look at this one, this doesn't have the solid line right down the top of the back. So sometimes it helps to look at more than one example of the morph. But you can see on this one, the sides are really kind of crazy. You have kind of these flames coming up in a jumbled up pattern on the sides of the snake. So what I want to do is I want to show you like base genes and then and some combos, and then add the Stranger on top of that so you can see what influence the Stranger has on some of these genes. And there's a limited number of Stranger combos over on Morphmarket, so I'm kind of picking and choosing. I can't really go all through all the different base genes because there's really not a lot that's been done with the Stranger. It's a brand new morph on the market, and I'm just pretty much going to start with what's been done so far. So this is a pastel ball python. Pastels can be really variable. I'd say this is kind of an unusual example. It's essentially what the pastel does is it really jumbles up the pattern and it brings out a lot of the yellow in the snake. And here's what happens when you put Stranger in with the pastel. Take a look at this. This completely changes the snake. And I actually have one more example of this that I'll show you next, but it's kind of interesting. You can definitely see a really strong influence when you're mixing it with pastel. And kind of the thing that struck me at first is it has these black outlines around the alien heads, which is really unique. And this one actually still keeps this kind of weird, kind of a jagged line right down the top of the snake, which seems to be kind of some of the characteristics of this gene. Here's another pastel Stranger. This one's kind of interesting. Doesn't quite have the solid line right down the top, but you can definitely see the black outline around the little spots here. They're not really alien heads, kind of reduced alien heads in a messed up pattern. You can definitely see kind of the lighter head, which is pretty typical of a pastel. And if you look really close, it almost looks like it has blue eyes, but most pastels actually have green eyes. And that's usually how you can tell you have pastel in the mix, if there's green eyes in your snake. So here's another one, the Firefly, probably one of my favorite combos as far as really simple, inexpensive combos. This is actually a pastel with the fire gene added, and it really cleans up the snake and brightens the yellow. Fireflies are really awesome snakes. Here's what happens when you mix Stranger in with the Firefly. Take a look at this crazy snake. This is a snake like I've never seen before, really crazy. And it's really interesting. You can actually see it pretty much still keeps some of the really crazy jagged line right up on the top here, and you can see the black outline around the pastel. It kind of lightens the whole snake, gives it a lighter background. It really makes for a really interesting combination. Here's another one. This is the Super Pastel Butter, and the reason I picked this one is because I found a Super Pastel Butter Stranger, and I kind of have to compare it to other snakes where you remove the Stranger, see what the base looks like, and then you add the Stranger on top of it to see what type of effect it has on the visual appearance of the snake. And this is a really almost like a creamy color, looks really awesome. The Super Pastel usually lightens the head a whole lot, and remember the butter is actually pretty much the same thing as the lesser, just a different line in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. This is what happens when you add Stranger to the Super Pastel Butter. And take a look at this. I would have never expected that you would actually get a snake that looks like this from that last one, adding Stranger to it. That is pretty wild, and it still keeps this interesting stripe right down the back of the snake, and it's outlined in the black. Seems to be a characteristic of the Stranger where you get the outline, the black outline around a lot of the colors in the patterns of the snake. It's kind of interesting. Here's another one. This is the Leopard Spot Nose. Leopard is, I'd say, probably the king of combos when it comes to code-dominant mutations. Makes some really crazy patterns, and the Spot Nose works really good with Clown. And if you actually do Leopard Spot Nose Clown, it's probably one of the most impressive combos. Here's what happens when you add Stranger to the Leopard Spot Nose. Take a look at this. You can definitely see it has some effect. Not really kind of what I would have expected. You can definitely see the line right down the top of the snake, which is pretty characteristic. Kind of a wavy line right down the top. And it's kind of hard to see the black outline in this one. You can see a little bit around the sides here, but the snake is so black. It's mixed for really awesome. I really like this stripe right down the top of the neck right here. That is really awesome. Here's another one. This is the Pastel Mojave. So the Mojave's also in the blue-eyed leucistic. And when you add the Mojave with the pastel, you get a really high contrast snake in most cases. Here's what happens when you mix Stranger with the Pastel Mojave. Take a look at this. This was totally unexpected for me too. This almost looks like a Champagne combo. This is essentially what Champagne does with a lot of different combos. And I would say Champagne's kind of limited because you mix it with anything and essentially you get kind of a washed out snake that's a slightly different color with not a whole lot of pattern. If someone handed me the snake, I would think, yeah, that's a Champagne something, and sure enough, this is actually a Stranger with the pastel and the Mojave. That's pretty unexpected. Here's another one. This is the Pastel Butter, essentially the same thing as a Pastel Lesser. Here's what happens when you mix Stranger with the Pastel Lesser. And take a look at this. This is even more unexpected for me. And it seems like it's kind of interesting. Sometimes it works almost like the Champagne in some combos, and in other combos it completely changes and acts like different genes. So it's almost totally unexpected as far as your normal genetics, what you would expect for certain genes. It's kind of like all over the board, something I would not expect a single gene to do anything like this. And you can see on top, again, you have this kind of a wavy, kind of a broken up line outlined in black. Seems to be the characteristic of the Stranger in a lot of combos, and the black outline around some of the pattern on the sides of the snake. Here's another one. This is the Butter Clown. The Butter is essentially the same as the Lesser. Clown is recessive, so it's a little bit more difficult to hit. I actually have a Lesser Clown in my collection, and essentially it starts like this, really bright and contrasty, and when it grows up, my Lesser Clown is really faded out quite a bit, almost to like a creamy color. This is what happens when you add Stranger to the Butter Clown. Take a look at that. It's kind of interesting. All the other combos, the last couple we we looked at almost looks like a champagne where it wipes out all the pattern, and here this is like totally different. You don't even have, you know, the line down the top, you don't have the black around the patterns, and you have a lot of pattern and color in here, which is almost unbelievable that one gene can have so many different effects when mixed with all these different genes. It's pretty amazing. So this is the last one I'll end with. This is actually the Crystal Phantom, and if you actually take a look at this, this is actually the Phantom and the Special, and they call it the Crystal Phantom. It's interesting. This is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, but a lot of times with some of these, like the Crystal and the Phantom, you only get white snakes when you mix it with certain genes, and a lot of times if you take these two and you mix it with certain genes, like the Crystal and the Phantom, this is actually a blue-eyed leucistic, but it's not actually an all-white snake. It's kind of an anomaly as far as the blue-eyed leucistic. So here's what happens when you mix Stranger with the Crystal Phantom. Take a look at this. This is like a snake I have never seen before. It's kind of really interesting how it's just so variable across all these genes, and it almost seems like it tries to keep the little line right down the back, down, you know, towards the tail and up on the head. You can see pretty much the characteristic line of the Stranger. And you really can't see much as far as the outline in black around a lot of it. Maybe just a little bit right on the top of the snake, but it's really interesting. I thought the Stranger is probably one of the most unique, morphs when you're actually mixing it with other genes. It's pretty much one of those ones that is totally unexpected and pretty much anomaly when it comes to ball pythons. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And Michael Ross asks, do you get a different smell between the coconut husk chips and the chips and fiber? Come on, Bobby. Oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? And that is a very good question. I don't know what Bobby's doing today. He's kind of going crazy. So yes, there is a big difference between the coconut chips and the fibers. And as a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I was looking at all these different substrates, and I decided I wanted to go with the coconut husk, which is pretty much the best one. The problem is it's about $25 a block if you get it over on Amazon. It's including shipping, and I can actually get it by the pallet for a lot cheaper. I usually buy about 100 blocks, cost me about $1,000. I figured it was about $11 a block if I get it shipped. And you can actually look at the coconut husk with the fiber in it. It's much less expensive over on Amazon. I think it was almost half price. It was like, I can't remember what the price was, but it was a lot less money. And I actually switched to that for a really short time, and I found that the fiber doesn't really absorb any moisture, and it doesn't do anything for the smells. And I got to the point where I was actually getting this cheaper coconut husk and fiber, and I was just pulling all the fiber out because it's just kind of like extra matting. It doesn't really absorb the humidity and give you a really good smell. It definitely smells different. I would probably not recommend the coconut husk, and the fiber doesn't work quite as well as the coconut husk, although if you're on a budget, it might be a good option. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.